Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Good
Yeah,
morning,
we are
Brussels.
on.
I hope, bonjour.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, we are unmuted now. We are unmuted now.
oh, okay. It
Thank you.
may come as a surprise to you, but I'd like to start
Okay.
by challenging the title assumption. Is our future so unpredictable? Do we need the foresight of truly gifted political scientists, historians, essayists, or poets to chart a future that builds on versions of not so long ago written pages? I shall try today to briefly frame this philosophical question into the mold of the Euro-Atlantic Resilience Center mandate, and with your permission, provide a few personal notes as well.
Yeah, we are unmuted now.
Are we on? Okay,
Yes. Yes, we are on.
thank you. I prefer to leave the other institutional angles of this generous topic to my more learned co-panelists here and in Brussels. As stated in my opening remarks, our center was designed as part of Romania's input to safeguarding the Euro-Atlantic community of values, thus including non-member states sharing similar morals. In an existential environment challenged by forces that refuse the confines of history textbooks. In this respect, we strive to contribute a modest item to the Euro-Atlantic Resilience Toolbox through concrete programs such as the NATO Resilience Course for Civil Experts, the Strengthening Synergies in Defense and Civilian Cybersecurity program, and the Enhanced Analytical Resilience Index designed by one of our colleagues, which will be showcased by a later panel. We bring our contribution to developing NATO's layered resilience concept that aims to integrate civilian and military resilience within the all-embracing concept of societal resilience. As such, our center tries to provide a concrete stepping stone in the harmonization of EU-NATO work in building resilience. The results so far warrant confidence. The EU Preparedness and Resilience Strategy 2024-2025 and the conclusions of the Hague Summit NATO Hague Summit indicate an increased alignment of these organizations' strategies and protecting the member states. The recently adopted Security Action for Europe, SAFE, temporary financial instrument, earmarked 150 billion euro for collective defense through industrial cooperation. Romania has clear priorities in harnessing this mechanism. Distinguished audience, looking around, let us take one example of unfolding reality: societal resilience. This is challenged by foreign information, manipulation, and interference, the FIMI. But are we facing a new threat, or is this insidious foe just an old enemy dressed in new colors? Let us remember, war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is power. Simple, perennial, and frightfully effective, right? These existential concepts defining the dystopian world envisaged by George Orwell in 1949 resound vividly painful to me and to my generation living in former communist countries. At the same time, they gain a certain unfortunate ring of credibility in the minds of my sons or younger age groups, both sides of the former Iron Curtain. And here we may talk about FIMI, but we must mainly address the roots causes of this appeal. We must build societal resilience. Remember its four components: identify, prepare, manage, and rebound. And we must safeguard democracy as the least imperfect order of a free society against erosion from within and thrusts from outside. Now let me close on a personal note. 33 years ago, as a Tempus scholar, I visited Brussels on a field trip to get familiar with European institutions, and in one of the bar talks, my Eastern European colleagues and I were asked what was the most significant gain we had, what was the most significant achievement in 1989. And my friends responded, democracy. I concurred, but I chose freedom, which is expensive, looks fragile, but it's the only option to a black hole. I think I would give the same answer now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fatu. And now we'll get back to our original format. First, we will go to Brussels to have the panel there. And the host of the Brussels panel will be Bernard Simon from Egmont Institute. Bernard, please take over.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I hope you can all hear me. First of all, thank you for the Euro-Atlantic Resilience Center for the invitation to Egmont to participate and co-host in Brussels, and also for the very smooth and productive collaboration between the two institutions. Thank you, Jenny, in particular, for that. Welcome to all participants to the Egmont Institute. We are the Royal Institute for International Relations in Belgium, and we're the think tank, effectively, of the Belgian Foreign Ministry. I would also like to thank our distinguished speakers who made it here perfectly on time, and I'm delighted to welcome them to Egmont. Mr. Marco Criscuolo, the NATO Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Cyber and Digital Transformation, Mr. Julian Kita, Director of Defense Enablement and Resilience in the Defense Policy and Planning Division of NATO, and Mr. Nathan Robinson-Greeson, Director, Committee on Democracy and Security for the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. And without further ado, and in the interest of keeping time, I will immediately move to invite our distinguished speaker, Marco Criscuolo, to start the proceedings here. Marco Criscuolo is NATO's Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary General and Director Strategy and Policy with the Cyber and Digital Transformation Division. He leads strategy and policy efforts to advance the Alliance's agenda on cyber defense, digital transformation, and hybrid resilience, as well as developing and coordinating the Alliance's efforts on countering cyber threats. From 2021 to 2025, he held the position of Deputy Director, NATO Digital Staff, launching the Alliance's digital transformation initiative through the development of policy, strategies, and standards for digital technologies, as well as a reform improving digital governance and management. From 2012 to 2021, he covered various roles in the NATO Office of Security, Joint Intelligence and Security Division, primarily as head of the Security and Policy Oversight Branch, but also as Director, NATO Office of Security ad interim. His responsibilities spanned across the domain of personnel, physical, protective, information, industrial, and cybersecurity. In 2006, he joined NATO as civilian of the International Military Staff and served until 2011 in NHQ C3S as Information Assurance and Cyber Defense Principal Policy and Technical Advisor. From 1991 to 2005, he worked as officer of the Italian Air Force, fulfilling various roles primarily through digitalization and information management in the Air Force, Staff, the Ministry of Defense, and NATO. Marco Criscuolo holds a Master of Science degree in Technology Management and second-level Master in Geopolitics, Economic Globalization, and International Institutions. I think you are eminently suited to address us this morning and to open the proceedings. The floor is yours.
Let's ask the others to judge that. First of all, thank you for having me here. I'm very happy to be here, and I know that I have a very important, portfolio in my hands. And I would like to start from the NATO-EU relations when it comes to the common challenges that we have. And I would like to start from more or less the ground of vulnerabilities, looking at threats, and then to go a bit deeper into what we are doing about it. So when it comes to the vulnerabilities, I believe looking at NATO and EU, and especially when it comes to strategic autonomy and resilience, I believe the train has left the station many years ago. I mean, there are many areas in which we have allowed others to take decisions. And I'm referring to, of course, how we look at rare earths, energy sources, semiconductors. We know that in a number of areas, we don't have the level of resilience that we have. I can think about batteries and how the batteries play an important role when it comes to digitalization, especially for data centers and continuity in AI. And I believe that this is something that we are trying to retrofit both as NATO and the European Union. When it comes to another vulnerability is that how our world is interconnected. I mean, we can see more with Industry 4.0 that we use technology to build new technology, and this, of course, increases the attack surface for our adversaries. Lateral moves are pretty easy when you move from one, for example, power grid to a main network that we use to conduct our operations. And another big vulnerability that we have is the fragmented response. I mean, we keep saying that we need to work all together, but in reality, our response when it comes to procurement strategies, when it comes to policies, we have no economy of scale, and we don't do strategic diversification, which is essential to be resilient. Moving into the threats, beyond the traditional threats, which nowadays requires a much more multi-domain approach on how we're going to deal with it by using also non-military instruments of power. If I look at cyber is contested all the time. And for our adversaries, there are always a guaranteed venues. Call them cyber criminals, call them cyber actors, it doesn't matter. There is always a good price that you can get at the end of it. The lower entry bar for adversary has really diminished. Look at how accessible AI is for all of them. And if you look at also in terms of numbers, in 2024, 1,600 cyber attacks in the maritime sector shows that we are really vulnerable. If I look at hybrid is ambiguous and deniable by nature. But what we have to be very careful when it comes to hybrid, if we make everything else hybrid, we will lose our power when it comes to countering hybrids. I think if you look at hybrid from a very generic perspective, we have plenty of events last year when it comes to drones. On a one NATO country, we could see 1,200 drones events over airports. And I think it's important to make a differentiation between what is a drone, which has an impact on our society, and there is a cost, therefore it calls for a lot of preparedness. And it's a different story when this was intentional, run by a state actor, because there's a number of countermeasures. And we see that there is a big disconnect on how we react, individually as allies or multilaterally as allies. That's why it's important to identify when it comes to hybrid, what is a tactical, short-term hybrid campaign versus a long-term strategy campaign. And we know that actors are different in nature. Some of them, they like to pre-position themselves and to get prepared for the long-term strategy. Others, they like to play on a much more tactical layer. And attribution is difficult. Sometimes we tend to spend too much time on a political attribution of an event, while we should just concentrate on what should we do when certain events happen, moving away from more options into measures that are triggered by certain events. And I mean, if you look into it from a completely different perspective, we should be in the position to say, because there is an event which has triggered a certain reaction, we have measures that we go automatically to apply without spending too much time in trying to make it as a political attribution. When it comes to countering threats in general, I think it's important to understand the threat. NATO is developing a lot of tools to try to track some of these events. I think there is a big differentiation between those events which are harmful, those events which are highly and easily attributed to certain actors, but there is also a gray zone of trends and patterns that is essential that we understand, because it gives also a bigger understanding of the bigger picture. The level of confidence of Intel is what we need when we decide to do something about it in a much more, of course, aggressive way. And of course, we have to mix this with open sources, which are always essential. When it comes to deterrence by denial, I think we need to understand the strategic risk and the critical dependencies of how especially our military capabilities are linked to some of the civilians' infrastructures. And we need to go a bit deeper in the understanding of the supply chain. There are areas where we as NATO cannot go ourselves, and this is where we need much more cooperation with the European Union, our international institutions, but also with local entities and nations. On a much more concrete element, we'd like to quickly touch base on things that we are doing in the field of energy security, critical undersea infrastructures, cyber defense, and of course, digitalization. On energy security, we're looking at energy security from two perspectives: energy as a target and energy as an enabler. Looking at energy as a target, it is really about how we're going to protect our critical energy infrastructures and how they are linked, of course, to NATO readiness. We need to be able to counter drones. We need to be able to counter cyber attacks. We need to be able to counter sabotage. And then we see also energy used as a coercion tool by some of the countries to put pressure on some of our small allies or partners. When we look at energy as an enabler, of course, safeguarding the production of liquid fuels is essential for NATO. I mean, we see trends, of course, moving more into reducing emission, but hypersonic does not work on batteries, and that's a reality of the fact. And the other one is about the ability to reduce our dependence on power supply chains, especially when it comes to batteries. We know that most of the market is there is a kind of a monopoly there. Batteries are essential for drones, as I said, are essential for data centers implementing artificial intelligence. So we cannot get away from that. For critical underwater infrastructures, I believe that I want to point out to a very success story, which is the establishment of the NATO Critical Underwater Infrastructure Network, which we could show how enhanced coordination between the military and the public and the private sector could contribute into increasing our awareness level on the threats, especially at sea. Baltic-centric and Task Force X-Baltic was an example of how you could use, let's say, low-cost equipment coupled with very expensive assets at sea. I mean, I'm talking about frigates and drones, and fast-track the acquisition of technology, which allows to be better prepared. When it comes to cyber defense, we are doing so many things, but I want to highlight one in particular, which is the NATO Integrated Cyber Defense Center. This is where NATO is investing a lot to try to put together into the same room military personnel, civil personnel, industry, and academia, because we believe that we are not in the position to retain enough skills and competence in the house. Time has come to outsource and recognize that industry can help us to, of course, augment when necessary. We've seen areas, of course, when incident response was impossible without industry. And moving quickly into digitalization, very often seen as only like a technological, say, element. I would like to underline that it's really about people and processing first. And talking about people is really about retaining human capital. And we know we are in a high competition there with industry. That's for NATO has decided to augment capacity through outsourcing, establishing framework contracts. And of course, use artificial intelligence where automation is possible. We need to change the speed of acquisition. We have a model that says you adopt or eventually buy or recreate. We tend to always create new solutions. In reality, we should be able to adopt from allies where this has already been done. And only if not possible, to go and buy commercial technology. We need to more and more admit to ourselves that we cannot develop requirements without understanding what is the art of possible in industry. That's why we insist that industry should be much more involved into the co-design of technical solution. And also economy of scale. There are areas such as cloud technology where economy of scale can only be achieved if we procure together. NATO has launched a couple of initiatives, one in particular where we are putting together 16 allies to buy cloud technologies and accelerate the speed at which we can benefit from, of course, this technology. And I want to stop with a very generic approach to security. In the old days, we used to put documents into safes, and that for us was meant resilient. I think now is more about, do I have the GPU capacity to run artificial intelligence? And to get to that, I need semiconductors, and therefore I need rare earths. So I call it like moving from safe to a rare earth approach when we need to start stockpiling what is necessary for us to develop the capabilities of the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco. That was a masterful review and a perfect setting, in fact, for the context of resilience, because without all the elements you covered, it will be very difficult to pinpoint what it is we need to do, both for resilience, but also for business continuity, the other side of an attack effectively, or the loss of a capability. Thank you very much. I will move now to to our second distinguished speaker, Julian Kita. Julian is the Director A6 of the Defense Enablement and Resilience Directorate, DERD, in the Defense Policy and Planning Division of NATO. His appointment comes after a six-year tenure as head of the Defense Capabilities Section from 2019 to 2025. Before joining the NATO International Staff, he was Defense Advisor at the French Permanent Representation to NATO from 2017 to 2019. Julian served as Chief of Staff and Counselor in charge of bilateral relations in the French Embassy in New Delhi from 2014 to 2017. From 2012 to 2014, he was Desk Officer for India in the Directorate for Asia and Oceania of the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He joined the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2010 and worked as Desk Officer in the Directorate for Business and International Economy until 2012. Before joining the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he was an Associate Research Fellow at the Asia Center of IFRI, a French and a very well-known leading think tank on international questions. Julian holds a master's degree in international relations from the Institut d'études politiques de Lille and a bachelor's degree in Japanese language, something that we share. Egmont Institute, Yokoso. Please.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. And before starting, I would like to start by also thanking the Euro-Atlantic Resilience Center, with which we have a very good cooperation. So thank you very much for that. So I would like to start by talking a little bit about the security environment. It has been done brilliantly by Marco. I would like simply to, I will not go into detail, simply to highlight two things. We indeed are under continuous attacks every day through cyber, as it was mentioned, hybrid actions, destabilization campaigns. And in parallel, we also, unfortunately, live in a deteriorated security environment in which the risk of confrontation, the risk of conflict, is more, unfortunately, likely than it was before. So there is a risk clearly of escalation, which is higher. And NATO has acted on that. There is clearly an urgency to act, and NATO has really done its part. First, on the military side, there was, I mean, it started in 2014, but it has obviously accelerated since 2022. I would say a huge effort on the military side to adapt our military organization to the challenges related to collective defense, to prepare the military organization for high intensity, large scale collective defense contingency. Huge efforts have been done. We have strengthened our posture. For instance, in Romania, we now have a battle group. We also have new plans. We also have a new organization of forces which aims at delivering mass at high readiness. So the military side has done a lot of efforts, and also resources have been allocated to do so. So when we look at the amount of investment during the past couple of years, and not more than a couple of years, during the past I would say, decade, we see that a positive trend. More money is going into military capabilities, but military capabilities themselves are not enough. What we see is that we definitely need also to have strong, resilient societies. It's absolutely important because, as you say, the first in my first point, the fact that we are under continuous attacks, the fact that we are challenged in the cyberspace, the fact that we are subject to disinformation campaigns, all these elements represent a high danger for our society, and there is a risk of us being defeated from within in case of conflict. So that's why strengthening resilience is absolutely critical. And it's about ensuring, of course, the continuity of government, but also continuity of essential services for our population, making sure that in crisis and even more in conflict, we can ensure that our population has access to basic needs: food, water, energy, transportation, but also communication. And here I think that clearly the efforts that NATO is conducting in Marco's division are of the utmost importance, making sure that in a world in which we mostly rely on new means of communications, we are able to use them without being, I would say, undermined. It's absolutely critical. And then the second dimension, and it was also highlighted before, is that we need this strong resilience also to be, the strong civilian preparedness to be able to support military operations. Because if we think about, as I said before, a large-scale collective defense contingency, it would represent moving military assets across the Euro-Atlantic at a very high scale. So in this context, the challenge for civilian stakeholders is that they will be in a situation potentially in which not only they will not be able to count on the military, as it is very often the case in peacetime when we have some, for example, natural disasters or crisis, but they will be in a situation in which, on top of their duty to respond to civilian needs, they will have to support military operations and make sure that the military as well would benefit from essential services, energy, transportation, communication. And on this, it's even more important in the context that again, you highlighted very well, that the dependency of the military to the private sector. We know that roughly 70% of SATCOM are dependent on private entities. We know that 90% of transportation of military assets are conducted by civilian companies. So these are elements which highlight the importance also of the civil support to military operation through the resilience agenda. And how do we do that? So the most important thing, and this is what we are trying to convey to allies through our works, is that we need a whole of government and a whole of society approach, and we need strong civilian planning. It's about mobilizing all stakeholders, MOD, but also all the other civilian ministries who are in charge of all the domains that I mentioned before, but also taking into account also private actors who very often are the first responders and are the ones owning the infrastructures and the capabilities that we would need for military operations. So this is, I would say, the core of our agenda right now in NATO, making sure that allies are developing strong civilian planning, strong civilian preparedness, and also making sure that allies talk to each other, work together, because there is indeed a regional dimension of this. There is a need for regional cooperation. We have, if you think, for example, about, of course, I mentioned movement of military assets, cross-border processes. It requires a cooperation above the national level. If we talk about uncontrolled movement of population in case of crisis and conflict, this is by sense something, a challenge that needs to be addressed at least a regional level. And of course, there is, again, as you mentioned, a very important NATO-EU dimension, and we are working on a daily basis with our EU colleagues to make sure that there is a good complementarity, to make sure that the very promising projects that they are also developing support our collective defense efforts. So that is what I could say about where we are on the resilience agenda. And again, I think it's of the utmost importance that we take forward, that we accelerate, because if there's one thing I would like to highlight is that there is a strong sense of urgency that everybody needs to have in mind.
Thank you very much, Julian. That was really extremely powerful in terms of framing the challenge of civilian-military cooperation. I'm responsible for hybrid threats and warfare here at Egmont, and one of the things that concern me enormously within the context of what you outlined is the NATO 7 base requirements of resilience, continuity of government, what have you. Because I think my impression is, and I may be wrong, and that may be something for us to discuss, is that all our exercises and planning on the civilian side is in silos. And in fact, from a hybrid threats perspective, one could well foresee a scenario in which even a natural disaster or a military situation will use things like FEMI, will use things like other hybrid tools to create a cascading effect across the 7 base requirements. And I think perhaps that's another regional dimension, and where we need to work both across silos as well as at a regional level to mitigate any cascading effect of exploiting either natural disaster or a military situation. So maybe perhaps something for us to discuss later. From the Brussels end, last but not least, Nathan Robinson Grisson. Thank you for coming as well. Nathan is director of the Committee on Democracy and Security for NATO Parliamentary Assembly. Nathan joined the Assembly in 2020 as director of the Committee on Democracy and Security. Prior to joining the Assembly between 2015 and 2020, he worked for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, in various positions in Kosovo and Ukraine. Previously, Nathan worked for NATO, as well as United Nations agencies and related entities, such as the International Atomic Energy Agency, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and the High Commissioner for Refugees. He has also worked for the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly and participated in various election observation missions with the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights and the European Union. Nathan studied at the Paris Institute for Political Studies, the famous Sciences Po, where he earned a bachelor's degree in political science in 2008 and a master's degree in international affairs in 2012. He also studied political science and international relations as an exchange student at Harvard University and the Moscow State Institute of International Relations. Nathan's mother tongue is French. He's fluent in English and has a working knowledge of Russian. Nathan.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you for this biography and also for the invitation, especially to talk about a topic that is as important as resilience. It's a topic that I think until a few years ago was perceived as a supported element of security, whereas now we understand that it is actually central to the way we defend our societies. And the reason for that is quite obvious. I mean, you mentioned some of the threats that we're facing. We're obviously facing a very diverse array of threats today, all the way from the risk of high intensity military operations to natural disasters and everything in between with hybrid warfare, cyber, and disinformation, etc. And so our societies need to be ready to withstand the shocks of these threats potentially, but also recover from them. And I would say as well emerge even stronger from them, right? By learning when we go through a crisis, by learning from our response, good or bad, and actually implementing improvements in our next response. The good news, as Julien mentioned, is that indeed NATO has taken that into account. The 32 allies have woken up to the importance of this with the 1.5% of GDP that is now, for the first time, an actual financial target for resilience and resilience-related matters. So that shows that there is clearly recognition of the importance of this amongst the allies. And I think that's actually a fact that is sort of underreported, unfortunately, underappreciated. Everyone's talking about 5%, 3.5 sometimes, very rarely about the 1.5, sadly, because I think it is actually a big step forward. Now, this decision and others as well, they show that there is, again, a recognition and acknowledgement of the fact that our societies need to be part of the equation when it comes to deterrence and defense. We clearly, Julien mentioned it as well, there is, you cannot basically deploy a military operation, or at least it would be very difficult to deploy military forces without the support of the civilian sector. And it's even harder to sustain those forces long term. So clearly the civilian sector is, in a way, an enabler of our deterrence, right? But if you look at some of the threats that we're facing, and you mentioned that actually in your presentation, a lot of them are targeting us as societies, but they try to do this, especially with hybrid, they try to do this by targeting individuals, right? If you think about cyber, actually most of cases are someone who clicks on the wrong link in a phishing attempt, right? And that can create difficulties for a company and for the society more generally. With disinformation, it's the same thing. Disinformation is very much tailored towards our interests as individuals, right? Based on what we like online, what we do, etc. So the individual in that sense is the weakest link, right, when it comes to resilience. But at the same time, the individual, all of us, we are also the first line of defense. And we saw that during COVID in particular, right? I don't know that we all reacted in the right way, but we saw at least that the way we each react has an impact on our ability, our collective ability to respond to a crisis, especially when the authorities are overwhelmed by the situation. We need clearly that what this shows is that we need a whole of society approach, as was mentioned, to security. We need to make sure that citizens, but also private companies, obviously, and I will argue, since I'm coming from a parliamentary organization, parliamentarians and generally elected officials have a role to play in this. Parliamentarians, they're the ones, on the one hand, voting the budgets, right? So they're the ones who are actually going to allocate the 1.5%. But they're also the ones on the markets every Sundays, just talking to citizens, talking to their constituents, and making sure that they understand both the need to invest, but also their own role, their own responsibility in security. So that's for me absolutely critical. The problem with getting us as citizens, as an individual, to be more involved in security, I think, is that it requires a change of a kind of mindset. In the past 30, 35 years since the end of history, which unfortunately has now ended, we've all kind of gotten used to the idea that security is a given, right? And B, something that is the responsibility of the state. So the state provides that for us. We see today that this is no longer the case, right? We all have a responsibility. In a way, it's kind of like we've been living in a fish tank, right? We can see the threats, the cat is out there, but you can see the cat through the glass, you're protected. The higher authorities are feeding you, so it's all good, And then suddenly one day, this is now, we've been released into the ocean with all of the content of the fish tank. And now we're facing all of these threats, and we need to bring back this sort of spirit or sense of survival, right? Without necessarily creating panic or fear in society. That's not what I'm saying, but we need to create a sense of survival, a sense of agility, resourcefulness, something that we had during the Cold War and that we've lost a little bit in the past again, 30 to 35 years. Now, the advantage with creating such a culture of preparedness, and you alluded to that, is that it helps us with all of these different kinds of threats, right, that we're facing. It helps us to be more resilient, indeed, and being able to recover, rebound from a crisis. But it's also, and particularly helpful when it comes to hybrid, right? Because it creates, and you mentioned it, it creates resilience by denial. It actually denies our adversaries the benefits of the potential attack. And our adversaries, if they think about it, if they know that we are prepared for a specific attack, why would they even launch it, right? So we absolutely need this. However, when it comes, and I'll be my last point, when it comes to hybrid in particular, resilience by denial is absolutely essential, but it's not sufficient, right? Because we need more than that. What we see is that our adversaries are constantly probing our societies, constantly looking for new vulnerabilities, right? We see it with these drones flying around airports. We see it with the undersea cables being cut by ships that drag their anchors. There's always a new thing, right? So whenever we're prepared for something, our adversaries are going to move on to the next thing. It's like we're playing chess, right? But every time that the adversary is making a move, they also get to change the way the board looks. So we know when we're playing what we're facing, but we don't know what we'll be facing next, right? So it's important to be ready for what we know could come, but we don't know what could come next. And so we need, in addition to this resilience by denial, we need resilience by creating cost for our adversaries, right? And that starts with, you mentioned that attribution. Attribution, strictly, everyone talks about attribution. Attribution, indeed, is both technical and political. The political version of it is very difficult to get. It's good if you can get it, especially if it's a collective kind of attribution. But it doesn't have to be. It can also just be technical, and there can be responses that come with that that don't have to be that come from the political level. But we need sanctions. We need to have a faster response to some of these attacks, and prosecuting, of course, the perpetrators. The problem is we haven't been very good at it, honestly, in the past few years, but it's changing. We see, if you look, for instance, at these, these ships that are dragging their anchors across the Baltic Sea, the North Sea, etc., we've kind of let them go, right? And then there was a case recently where the Finns actually, there was the Eagle S, a ship that cut cables between Finland and Estonia, and within 3 hours, the Finnish authorities were actually on the boat, on the ship, arrested everyone, arraigned the boat, and got it back to Finland and prosecuted the captain and the crew. Now, unfortunately, this is kind of a mixed example in the sense that they lost the case, right? The Finnish authorities lost the case for different reasons, but it doesn't matter. In a way, it was an irritant for our adversaries, and it showed that we are ready to actually act and do something about it. And I think this is the kind of approach that we need to take in the future. We need to do more of this, be more determined, be more proactive, and to impose, again, cost on our adversaries when they attack us and try to destabilize us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nathan. Again, to throw another bit in the mix, from our work on resilience, it is also clear to us that ensuring continuity of business is part of deterrence. So perhaps the concept of resilience could be expanded not only to preventing attacks, but also to how do we continue operating when there is damage, and that in itself increases the cost to the adversaries. It makes it really quite costly to do something that will do damage to a particular infrastructure, for example, but we can do without, or we can continue without. So perhaps that's another sort of area we can explore later. I am very grateful to our distinguished speakers here in Brussels for their fantastic contributions. Thank you very much. And I'm sure it has been absolutely the right framing of the various issues from different perspectives, as we saw. And with that, I hand over back to Bucharest, to Christina.
Thank you, Bernard, and thank you to our our speakers in Brussels. Do stay with us, please, because we also will continue the talk here in Bucharest. I will take two ideas for the moment from what the Brussels panel said. First of all, that the alliance is paying a lot of attention, the North Atlantic Alliance is paying a lot of attention when it comes to preparedness of the civilian. And the second idea I noted is that societies are part of the defense equation. And in this note, I would like to pass over the baton to Laszlo Borbély, State Advisor for Sustainable Development Department in the government of Romania. Mr. Borbély, please.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for this kind invitation, and I am very honored to be here. And I have to say that there are brilliant speakers in Brussels here and during 2 days based on the invitation of Euro-Atlantic Resilience Center. We will discuss a lot of problems. I am in charge from 2017 to implement Agenda 2030 in Romania, like State Counselor of the Prime Minister. It's a very easy task. No, it's not an easy task. It's a very hard issue. But what we are talking today about resilience is all about sustainable development of a society. And I have to tell you that we have to make the future predictable. Yes, that's why we are here. But in this moment, it's a little bit unpredictable. And you know, it's very interesting. I belong to the Hungarian minority in Romania. And we have an alliance, we are in the parliament, we are in the government in this moment. And we had a congress just 3 weeks ago, our Congress of Hungarian Community. And what is the word, the key word what we chosen 3 weeks ago regarding our future strategy of Hungarian community? Resilience. So it's very important that also communities, also societies are very much preoccupied about this resilience. What means? Of course, this means societies based on democratic values, leadership on this field, and of course international cooperation and all these institutions what we were talking and you mentioned to cooperate. It's a very difficult task. But I come back, of course we have to change from the rapid response to intelligent anticipation. But I would like to mention, because it was about also natural disasters and risks in our life, and of course wars and what we have now, 2015. 2015 was a milestone, in my opinion, in the era of humanity. The stars were aligned. Why? Because we had on that time the summit in Sendai regarding natural risk and disasters, the summit of Addis Abeba, money from where and from how we concept for the next years to spend more money for sustainable development, of course Agenda 2030 and Paris Agenda. What happens with us from 2015? Because everybody was in favor of these principles, because we need to have principles. Without principles, it's not deserved to live our life. We have to be game changers in this moment. And it's about mentalities, it's about principles, because we are talking about sustainable development. It's not just to protect our nature. It's economy, competitiveness, it's a balance between social and to preserve our environment. All together are functioning, not in silos. So in this moment, I have to tell you that, and of course we have to protect our infrastructure, we have to prepare public services, we have to have educated communities, and this is one of the most important issues, how to educate our people. And after that, they are doing more about our sustainability life, our health life, about our happy life, more happy life. So in this moment, Romania, I have to tell you that it's a regional center recognized by United Nations, recognized by OECD, recognized by World Bank and other institutions in sustainable development. Why? Because it's not just about what I do with my colleagues. It's about the Romanian society. Everybody were partners. Since 2017, we built an interinstitutional framework. The government, which decide in this field to have in different parts of our economy and social life, we are coordinating the circular economy in Romania. Our department. We have the coordination of alternative fuels. It's a very interesting, also regarding risks, security, and how we use them, alternative fuels, in our life. About energy efficiency of the buildings. And the most important is, in my opinion, to have professionals, to have educated people. And in this moment, I have to tell you that Romania is the only European Union country, as I know, that we have a new job in Romania, expert in sustainable development, which means also about resilience, which means also about how to prepare against some risk in our society. We have 2,300 experts in this moment prepared by post-university courses, and from 2,300, 1,600 are from local level, because from local level, from local authorities, they are more close to the citizens. They could explain what means this behavior of a sustainable society without wars, without this kind of risks. And of course, the future generation. We have a consultative council of the wise people from Romania, yes, from academia and other who helped us, and they are with the governments, with all the governments since 2017, and we have the civil society coalition for sustainable Romania based on more than 160 entities. And we have a network. We have hubs in each ministry by order of ministry, by a law voted by the parliament, because now we revise our strategy from 2017. We have more ambitious goals. We have to change it, but with you, with all the society, with all those very well prepared people who are working. So it's just one part of our activity. Of course, we have a lot to do, and education, and to be more close to the young generation. We have different projects, but basically, finally, I would say that resilience is not just a state policy. It is a state of mind, and a state that invites us to prepare, to be prepared, united, and courageous in the face of the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before I give the floor to our next speaker, I would like to ask as well the audience present here in Bucharest to prepare their questions for both our panelists in Bucharest and in Brussels. So our next speaker is Vlad Nistor, Director General of the Romanian Diplomatic Institute. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will intervene with a completely different perspective, and the explanations are two. First of all, I am historian, and I will speak for my training perspective. Secondly, I'm for already a long period of time here in Bucharest, and also in Brussels in my former capacity of the member of the European Parliament. I was involved mainly in international relations, and let's say in everyday's developments there. The question Ambassador Fătu asked us at the beginning of his first intervention, unfortunately the colleagues in Brussels weren't connected in his speech, of course, was, is this where Romania is the eastern flank or the eastern front? Today, my feeling is that we are on the Eastern Front. We Romanians, the Bulgarians, the Hungarians, the Slovaks, and so on and so forth, northern, and why not southern, going to Turkey. The consequences is enormous because we cannot continue with business as usual because that's not the case. The developments in the international arena are very, very, very fast. And from this perspective, we must be every day, every hour, and every minute prepared for every kind of provoking elements. Of course, in all these building a resilient society facing the enemy, whoever the enemy will be. Today, the enemy comes from our eastern border, from the Russian Federation. But tomorrow, the enemy can come from wherever. Sometimes we were looking to the Near East. For the moment, we seems to be in a position of relaxing from that direction. But from this perspective, we must be always prepared every day. Secondly, what is happening these days is strange, because in the first moment, I was in a European Parliament's mission as member of SEDE, Security and Defense Committee, subcommittee, in Turkey with a group of friends when Russia invaded Ukraine. And before that, one day before, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin declared that something like that will never happen. All my colleagues were, when the news came, were amazed, were shocked, for them, my feeling was, for all of us, was almost impossible to believe that something like that is happening. But it happened. Discussing from this perspective, we must do our best. Of course, the society is essential, but the army is also important from the technical point of view and also from the capacity of mobilization. Why not? Some years ago, I think 2 years ago, it was, I had opportunity, everybody had the opportunity to see a book with 3 authors. One of them was General Ben Hodges, very well known in Bucharest because my feeling sometimes is that he stays here more than in the United States. That book was called Europe and the Future War. And he predicted that in 5 years' time, and I think that I was when he launched his Romanian version of the book, and he said, okay, 5 years' time, and that was 2 or 3 years ago, entire Europe will be in war. If we do not understand this danger, and we are facing our attitude is business as usual, we are really in a danger. I had exactly the same discussion with one of the vice presidents in charge, of vice prime ministers in charge of Romania, and he said exactly the same. We must understand that we cannot continue as we did 3 years ago. The reality is essentially different. And to this, I must add an element. I consider it very, very interesting and very important for all of us. Of course, we all have strategies. Of course, NATO, which is the most important alliance, defensive alliance in the history of humankind, had a lot of well-built, well-constructed strategies. But what are we seeing every day? There are moments when decisions, attitudes, and changings in international politics appears by night. The main powers, sometimes can change the attitude towards a person, a state, or whatever you want. And we saw these in the last 6 months happening every day. Of course, we were shocked 2 years and a half ago when, or 3 years, I don't know when really the war started, when no international law elements were preserved. For us today, it's something not new at all, because we already are challenging this reality. But also we are challenging another one, the possibility to change every day the strategy or the elements of the strategy. And referring again to Ben Hodges and colleagues' book, they said there that the result of what will happen in the moment when China will move in the South China Sea, the withdrawal of the majority of the American troops from the European continent will have an enormous consequences for us all. And unfortunately, we now can see sometimes that such a danger is coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If we have any questions from the room, please raise your hand and introduce yourself. The floor is open to both Brussels and Bucharest. So please address to whom you want to obtain the answer.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Cilacu. My name is Mihai Macari. I'm the Secretary General of Romanian Energy Center, the primary association representing state-owned and private companies in Romanian companies in Brussels. I didn't have a question per se, but Mr. Vlad Nistor threw at us a curveball when he mentioned that we have to be ready for everything and any time. And I'm thinking of the cost of being ready for these kind of scenarios for everything and every time. I'm thinking of the energy sector, not necessarily in Romania, but in Europe and all over the world, where the vulnerability points comparing with the last 15 or 20 years increased significantly. In Romania, we had about 350, 400 generation capacities. Now we have close to 1,000 large generators and 250,000 prosumers. We have close to 10,000 EV charging stations. We have batteries. So the granularity of the threats are increasing dramatically. And I'm thinking of the cost of being ready to address every threat and think of this kind of stuff. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Please.
Radu Burduj, I am the Executive Director of the Euro-Atlantic Institute for Building Resilience from Chișinău, Republic of Moldova. Just a couple comments. We talked extensively in Brussels and here in Bucharest about resilience, and I believe we should bring the perspective of the Eastern partner states such as Ukraine, Moldova into this discussion, because I think we are right now, Ukraine is fighting an active war, but we're facing the full-fledged hybrid war. So I think our expertise here is maybe quite valuable. What I heard during the discussions, basically reflect pretty much everything we see in Moldova. And this thing that we need to build a resilience by denial, as our colleagues in Brussels express themselves, and building a wall, a static defense. I think we will not get too far with this, because we have to move from static defense, from static resilience, from documents. We need to move to adaptive systems. We need to be adaptive. Why? Because everything evolves. And I believe next year we will be sitting here at this table and we will explore the next frontier of resilience, because things will move. That's why we need to move together with the threats. And it is easier said than done. And I'm bringing here my former military hat. What the army is fighting every time? The last war, right? That's what we do, not just in the military, that's what we do here in resilience, in building resilience. And resilience should not be seen just as an enabler. It should be seen as a strategic capability, just like we see it in the Republic of Moldova. Because now, in the Republic of Moldova, resilience is basically that tool, that capability that allowed us to stay on the democratic course and to stay on the European path. So that's how we should see resilience in all the countries. And of course, this is how we achieve this. And one of the main tools is the international cooperation, the cooperation with the European Union, cooperation with NATO. We in Moldova, in the latest military strategy, we talk about active neutrality. So we're moving from the concept of the classic neutrality, because we understand that this is outdated already. Yes, I agree that we need the whole of society approach, but we need to change mentality. We need to understand resilience has to flow in our veins, and because of this, I think we need to train as much as possible young leaders, young people, and not just on basis of professionals, but on basis of volunteers. Why? Because, and my Ukrainian colleague will not let me lie here. When the war started in Ukraine, and even now, the volunteers play a huge role, because the state institutions are very inert, very long time to take decisions. So the volunteers, that the businesses, and other actors, state and non-state actors, can complement this vacuum when the state is moving very slow in taking decisions and maybe fielding new systems, fielding new capabilities, or providing answers. I think I will conclude again by saying that resilience should not be seen as an enabler, but as a strategic capability. And one more thing, I did not really hear here voices of politicians. I had sort of in my career, I was in the military, then I went to be State Secretary General of the Ministry of Defense, was military representative at NATO, so I kind of covered this technical thing. And then I moved to the civil society, and then I stepped into the politics. And then in the politics, it's very interesting when you talk about resilience, because you need to stay clear from pushing too far. Specifically when you're countering the foreign information and malign influence, when you combat disinformation, because sometimes it infringes or it damages the basic freedoms, freedoms of speech, freedoms of having not multicultural, but the correct word for this. But different political views, I would say, because sometimes using the expression consolidating or building resilience, sometimes this thing goes too far and basically goes into another spectrum of democratic freedoms. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you for the invitation and for the presentations.
Thank you. Anyone else with questions? If not, oh, okay, we have another one.
Thank you very much. I'm retired Major General Paul Crumuz. I'm with the New Strategy Center here in Bucharest. Nathan mentioned something about the value of the sanctions. And my question to Nathan is, how can we operate in a way in which just thinking and concentrating on sanctions will not transform them in a magical tool? And I'm saying that because if we are looking very carefully at what happened in the latest, I don't know, 30 years, 35 years, sanctions are sometimes used as, let's say, a solution to avoid tough decisions. And they are not always getting to the results we were thinking of. I'm just giving two examples. North Korea has been under sanctions for so many years. Still, they were able to develop nuclear weapons and other stuff. Iran, sanctions again, and they are very close to have a nuclear weapon. So how exactly can we, someone was using some years ago, smart policy between hard power and soft power, smart power. Is that possible in today's environment? Thank you.
Mr. Grayson, can you please answer the question? It was addressed to you.
Oh, yeah, of course. So maybe, should I address all three questions, or?
Go ahead, yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
okay.
Yeah.
You can? Okay, great. So maybe I'll start with the first question on the energy sector and the cost for private companies of creating redundancy and resilience. And it's true, it's a genuine problem. I mean, but in a way, if you think about it, is the exception what's coming now with the fact that private companies actually have to invest in their own resilience, and it's not, as I was saying, it's not the state that's providing the security for them, or was the exception the past 30 years? Because I feel like actually the exception was the past 30 years. It is, now it's normal that private companies are thinking, why should we invest in this? Why do we need a second cable when one is just enough for our, just-in-time delivery and our operations? But actually, again, that's the exception more than the norm. There is a cost, that's for sure, and states, unfortunately, are not really in position right now financially to support private companies very much in this. But there is a need for private companies to actually increase their resilience, and yes, one of the options is redundancy. I recently went to Svalbard with a parliamentary delegation, and we saw how on Svalbard there's this enormous, something that we all rely on without knowing it, or very few people know it. There's this enormous sort of satellite information reception center on Svalbard, and there are only two cables that link Svalbard to Norway. One of them was cut not that long ago, by accident or not. Luckily the second one wasn't cut. But if it had been cut, then all of us, including the Russians, the Chinese, everyone, would have not even known what the weather would be tomorrow. So, then it's a question for the state. It's a question also for that private company that operates this center. Do we need a third cable? In this case, there were two, so it worked. But what happens if then the second one gets cut? Someone's going to have to invest, and indeed, I think private companies will have to pay some of the price. But then again, I want to insist on the fact that that's more the normality, more the norm than what we've experienced in the past 30 years. Then on the question about Moldova, well, I mean, obviously, Moldova is really an example for all of us, right? And I think you're absolutely right. We need to, and I say here all of the allies, we definitely need to help Moldova, we need to help Ukraine, but actually we've got so much to learn from them, right? So we need to share best practices amongst ourselves. We need to support them, of course, financially, whatever we can, but we also need to make sure that we learn from how they operate. I mean, in Ukraine, it is actually an active conflict, so there's a lot that we can learn from that. But in Moldova, there's a lot that Moldova is doing, particularly in countering disinformation, cyber. That's more sort of active, more of a sort of frontline situation than what we are experiencing. So we should definitely learn from them on this. You talked about the need to change the mindset. I addressed that as well. I think that's absolutely essential. Just a quick example, and you talked about politicians and how institutions are quite slow to react. But I think the institutions, and particularly the politicians, it's true, coming from parliamentary organizations, they have a role to play. I mentioned the parliamentarians on the markets. We need to explain to citizens that A, they have a role to play in security. This is not, again, something that's provided exclusively by the state. And B, that there's a need to invest in this, not just in, well, of course, in our armed forces, but also in our resilience, right? And that comes with, again, redundancy of infrastructure, etc. And sometimes it starts with very small things. We once took a delegation to Sweden, and there were some French members who were there in the delegation. And one of the things that we discussed was obviously the sort of total defense and civil whole of society approach to resilience and to security in Sweden. And we saw how the Swedes have this like in times of war or crisis booklet. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's actually fascinating. It really tells you like what you need to have in your house in order to survive for 5-6 days without support from the authorities. And the French members who were there were really impressed with that and decided to try to do the same thing in France. And actually France is in the process now of doing the same thing. So these are small things where the authorities can actually have a role.
And I think it also has a psychological effect on society.
Yes.
It sort of tells people it's no longer the old.
Exactly. And again, we saw this during COVID. All of us went out and tried to buy toilet paper as much as we could. It was ridiculous, but it made sense back then. If we had been prepared, if we had followed all of these instructions, then there would have not been a need for this. Not that there wasn't need anyway in the first place, but
Sure.
we would have not had to do this. And lastly, so the question on sanctions. I mean, of course, sanctions are not a magical tool. I listed it as part of a bunch of reactions that we could and should have. Sanctions indeed are a tool that can work. Sometimes, very rarely, it's true. It works only if it's together with other elements. Now, I don't want to talk about North Korea in this case. I don't think it's exactly the same as what we're discussing here. But I want to go back to this example of the shadow fleet. Right, the Russian shadow fleet. Sanctions are having a bit of an impact there, but of course they're not sufficient. We need to do more. And if I go back to my example of the Eagle S, the Finnish authorities again went onto the ship, arrested the crew, brought them to Finland, went through a prosecution process. These are the kinds of actions that we should be taking together with sanctions. Sanctions are not a sort of silver bullet, but together with other actions, they can actually have an impact.
Yeah, and I think longer term, sanctions do have an inflationary impact on the target economy, so they do have a destabilizing effect domestically, but it takes time.
Absolutely.
Marco,
quickly on the 3 points. When it comes to the cost of preparedness at all times, I think in the end it's a balancing act on autonomy. I mean, it's really about how much we want to manage the risk, how much we accept the risk. How do we address that? From a NATO perspective, we have a very concrete crisis. I already referred to it. There is a lot of discussion about cloud sovereignty, data sovereignty in NATO. And of course, if you look at it from each single nation, there is a national angle, there is a European angle, and there is also a NATO angle. And if you try to address complexity, that's the moment where you don't move. Because especially for some countries, having complete sovereignty will not be realistic. I mean, money-wise, it's going to be super expensive. That's why we are pushing more and more for a multilateral approach. So we believe that certain risks that cannot be taken in-house with the internal resources should be addressed through coalition of the willings. The way you approach certain costs when it comes to technology is also allowed to have economy of scales if you buy together. That's what I said. I mean, especially for new technology, artificial intelligence, cloud, we are pushing more and more allies to get together. And there is not only a benefit of economy of scale, it's also you buy the same stuff. So at the end, you are interoperable by design, because you buy the same technology. When it comes to adaptive system, the concept that Moldovan colleague referred to, absolutely correct. I mean, if you look at Ukraine and what happened, who would have thought about the fact that they could have been using wire drones at the end of the conflict? I mean, this was unthinkable at the very beginning. So I think the idea is that now we are very concentrating on our processes, which are requirements bound. So we tend to try to imagine what we need. We go out to industry, we define requirements, and then 10 years later, that's more or less the average governmental approach that we have in our countries, we get what we wanted 10 years before. And this is not adaptive at all. So I think we have to move away from that concept, which requires a lot of change. It requires a change in which you acquire services. I mean, let's move away from acquiring products and let's try to buy services, which stretches a bit the boundaries of our legislation. Because at the end, what we have to go out and say, well, we don't know exactly what we want, but we know we want to try to solve this problem. And this requires that you go out with much more flexible contracts and accept also a failure rate which is higher. Look at it, artificial intelligence. The average failure rate is 70%. So we have to accept as government that sometimes we're going to fail fast to make savings in the end. So I think it's also about requiring changing completely our acquisition regulations. When it comes to sanctions, I fully agree with Nathan. Sanctions are part of a wider tool set that we have. What in NATO we are trying to do, we're trying to force allies to work together, not necessarily at 32, but unilaterally and in coalition of the willing, to try to develop what we call campaign-style approaches. So how do you increase the cost? You increase the cost because you do have sanctions, because you have decided to apply specific countermeasures, maybe on a more tactical level, because we have decided to have a high-level STRATCOM on going about attribution of certain vectors. What is important that we contain de-escalation, because at the end, too many together, that might generate escalation laterally or at a higher level. There is a challenge out there. A lot of the allies, they prefer to do things without telling others, for good reasons, security reasons. I mean, sometimes you don't want to reveal your strengths in doing certain things, especially in the world of cyber, especially when you go offensive, or you don't want to show that you have pre-positioned your assets. And therefore, it's very tactical discussion that you need to have with the allies, getting to it around the table, design a campaign-style approach, decide who does what, and at the end generate an effect which is by chance higher than the one that a nation could generate. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian.
Yeah, thank you. Just a few comments on some of the questions and also on some of the previous interventions. Regarding the Ukrainian and Moldovan experience, so I just would like to highlight that we have actually a very good cooperation with Ukraine and Moldova, including on resilience. To give you an example, a couple of days ago, we had a very big civilian planning conference in Stockholm. There was a Ukrainian delegation who shared their lessons learned. So I think it's ongoing. It's quite active, but certainly I totally agree with the fact that we have a lot to learn from actually not only on the resilience side, also from a military perspective. Second, about the Moldovan colleague comment about resilience by denial. We don't use that much the concept resilience by denial. I think we use deterrence by denial. Resilience by denial. I would rather, I mean, the way we see resilience, we rather see resilience as the first line of defense, but not necessarily something that can support deterrence. But I would say, as was brilliantly exposed earlier, if we think about deterrence, it's more about imposing costs, and resilience is not necessarily imposing costs. So I think resilience as complementary with more, I would say, proactive actions or offensive actions sometimes. And then is my point about the question about the sanctions and the balance between hard power and soft power. So here we have to keep in mind that we are a defensive alliance, and therefore we can a defensive alliance with certain values. And for instance, we share the attachment to international law. Therefore, there are things which we would not do, or at least we would not do, and we would not discuss at 32, and we will maybe consider them on a national basis, but not as an established policy. I think so. I think here we need to be, I would say, a bit prudent. I think there are a lot of things that allies are doing, and not necessarily everything goes through the multilateral discussions. And one last comment about Ben Hodges' prediction that Europe would be at war. Yeah, this is a possibility, but again, this is a prediction which against which we can plan, and we actually own our trajectories. And I think NATO's agenda of strengthening deterrence and defense, of investing in our military capabilities, or investing into our resilience, is about that. Is about making sure that the calculus of our adversary, first and foremost Russia, would not be a wrong one, that there would not be any miscalculation. So again, I think the higher risk would be to do nothing. But the good news is that we are doing a lot of things. We are investing a lot of money. We are investing in military capabilities, in civilian resilience, and these are things that can change the calculus of the adversary. So I say, on this last optimistic note, I say we are not doomed yet.
Thank you, Julian. Perhaps from my side, a comment on the private sector and slack capacity, let's call it, or redundancy. From our experience talking to the private sector about resilience, any discussion that revolves around threats doesn't get much attention. It is too strategic, too far away. But when it comes down to business continuity, the private sector listens, because that's a board responsibility and a management responsibility. They cannot avoid looking at framing the issue as a business continuity issue, survival of the business, reputational risk, in some cases existential risk, as opposed to just talking about strategic threats such as hybrid threats. Perhaps an area of research interest we are focusing on at the moment, which may be again of interest to everybody on the call, is the impact of the clash between sovereignty and disruptive technologies on resilience and business continuity. I think this is a horizontal or transversal area that cuts across the NATO 7 basic requirements of resilience. And Marco, you mentioned the cloud, for example. You mentioned the data centers. And in that sense, data as such is like the fuel that we need also for both military as well as civilian capacities. Data is the fuel that we use now for everything. So the resilience of data in itself cuts across all the other areas. In NATO parlance, is the 7 basic requirements. And I think that clash between sovereignty and technology is potentially the new frontier in resilience research. Christina, over to you. Mikhail, do you have something? Christina, over to you.
Thank you, Bernard, and thank you for the answers from Brussels. If there are any other questions, if not, I can also address a question. And since we have here Professor Vlad Nister from the Diplomatic Institute, I would like to know how all these talks we had here in this room and other talks like this one can be transferred further to our politicians, to our decision factors, because we have some predictability in this future. The war in Ukraine will probably continue. We don't like this, but it looks like it. The hybrid war is ongoing not only in the Republic of Moldova, it's present all over the world. Romania was just one of the worst cases. So how can we take all this information we debated here in this room and other conferences, because there are ideas, to transfer them to those that actually has to decide, and then to make the population understand. As a journalist, I can take the second part for the population, but the middle management,
Middleman.
the middleman between academia and experts and politicians. How can we do it?
Thank you for the question. The question is a very interesting one, but the answer is a very general one. That's the same with all the think tanks in this world. And it depends the level of culture in a society, political culture. That means including the level of political culture of political dissidents on one hand. On the other is the capacity, the clarity and the influence of the think tanks involved in these debates. Because you know there are think tanks, a lot of think tanks are more active. The gentleman there, General, is, as myself, a member of New Strategy Center, and I saw with my own eyes how possible is to make from something just created, because I am in the board from the moment when New Strategy Center was created, and how can something like that develop, and how can as a result of the activity and of the decision of the persons involved in it, the president, the director general, and so on and so forth, can it be heard in the decision-making offices. It is happening. It is happening in United States. It is happening in Great Britain. I know I'm myself a member of IDEAS, which is the second most important academic think tank in the world after the Harvard. This is in London School of Economics. And I know that at any debate there are a lot of political dissidents and a lot of specialists coming from the government of United Kingdom. And in Romania also, in Romania sometimes it touches the levels, the upper levels in the political decision, but unfortunately not always. And I say this also in my other capacity, my other hat as a member, as a politician. Thank you.
Thank you as well. I think we have to conclude this panel, the strategic resilience for an unpredictable future. And my simple conclusion will be, let's all of us be prepared, because although there are plans, it's kind of difficult to see them happening as fast as the reality goes. Thank you to our panelists in Brussels. Thank you, Bernard, for helping me to moderate this. And thank you to all our participants here in Bucharest and to our audience.
Thank you very much, and good day to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.